Alright, listen up, I have a question for you. What happens when DE decides to give the creation concept of a new frame to their community of pseudo-sentient flesh bags? That's right, I'm talking about you. The people who actually buy discounted Skatas from Darvo. The ones who still play Lunaro. And yes, even those who still think that Clem is the epitome of comedy. Clem. Linguini, ravioli. You people! You are the ones that DE trusted to make sensible decisions with their golden goose of a video game. So did it really surprise anyone when we got forum threads full of exactly the kind of quality that you would expect?
What? What am I looking at?
My personal favorite is whatever the hell this one is. But eventually, DE narrowed down the list to suggestions that most likely weren't created by literal goldfish hurling themselves at typewriters. And once the dust settled from the community vote, we were left with the broken frame concept as the winner. Fast forward many months later, and we've gotten Xaku, a FNAF exoskeleton-looking motherfucker who couldn't be more of a mixed bag if they were birthed from some Chex Mix. And yet, despite that, Xaku has probably my second favorite kit design in the game. And by that I mean, the tools they have in terms of how they function really tickles my fancy. A weapon damage buff, an AoE armor strip, a hand laser, a mind control CC, and of course, being able to pull off your own skin. It's all things that I quite like. And mind you, this is all on the same frame who can do this. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that Xaku has my second favorite kit design in the game. The only way I could be happier is if they gave me a copy of Cyberpunk 2077 and fed me white cheddar Cheez-Its on a couch. But the effectiveness of these tools is a completely different story. See, Xaku at the time of writing has a kit that functionality-wise is the equivalent of a car that can drive, but has a flat tire, a broken AC, and a door held on with just duct tape and the tears of orphans. And by the way, no, the irony in that analogy being attached to a frame whose literal concept is that they're broken is not lost on me. Xaku can do what you need them to do, but they don't necessarily feel good to play or do what you want them to do. But this is an interesting time for me to cover this frame because DE has just announced that they're getting a second round of buffs. So this video is going to be in a weird in-between area, and it's also guaranteed to be outdated soon. So what I've decided to do is to use Xaku's current state to compare and contrast with what's being changed. Because otherwise we'd be waiting another 50 years for a video upload, and it doesn't help that DE hasn't given us a release date for when these changes go into effect, so fuck me! So, given all that, just keep that disclaimer in mind, this will be a video that hopefully will get outdated very soon and only remain as a relic of when Xaku was pee-pee poo-poo. But right now, Xaku's kit is cool as fuck, but has the functionality of a lead balloon. Time to shit on them. Here we go! Xata's Whisper allows Xaku to channel the power of pure calcium to flow through their veins, which obviously gives you a void damage buff. An extremely simple power, but one that is unfortunate enough to be stuck with a shittery that is void procs. And I can't stress the shittery in that sentence enough. Seriously, fuck these things! You see, void procs themselves are garbage. The only advantage they offer is making it easier to hit an enemy, which would be great if this were a game where you actually had to aim. But what makes it even worse is that it prevents you from getting headshots, at least in most cases. And while I could be wrong on this part, I think having void damage added to a weapon reduces the odds of its other damage types from proccing. And if I'm correct on that, and I always am, I've never been wrong in my entire life, then that is also kind of an issue given how bad the proc is. So the only advantage you're getting from Xata's Whisper is the raw damage increase, which is fine on crit-based weapons, but not so much for everything else. This can result in Xata's Whisper actually making your weapon hit like a whisper in some cases. Also, for some reason, the game doesn't internally count Void as an actual status. Seriously, what? Which makes it even worse because that means it doesn't proc growing power or get benefits from condition overload.
Holy shit, fuck Void!
But luckily, an upcoming change to Void procs is making it so that the bubble will draw projectiles to whatever body part the bubble was procced onto, which makes weapons like the Zymos splurt in anticipation. But as for Void procs not counting as a status, they didn't say a fix was coming for that, so cross your balls and pray. Though, if you want my opinion, even with those changes, I still think this is probably going to be the power that you would want to replace with something from the wall fleshlight if you had any inclination to, especially if you're put off by the fact that void procs don't really benefit melee, which is unfortunate because this act would mean turning your back on the power of calcium and almost guarantee a permanent ban from r/never broke a bone. Now onto what I would say is Xaku's signature power, Grasp of Lohk, aka Unlimited Gunworks. And this power is in no short supply of appeal. If you think being able to pull a bunch of floating guns literally out of thin air isn't the coolest shit ever, I would like to ask that you refund all of the oxygen you've used up to this point in your life. Now, I've gone on record saying that some of the best abilities are the ones that play the game for you. Whether developers like it or not, at some point in a live service game's lifespan, the most fun thing to do with it is to have it play itself. It's why I like tools like Flechette Orb and Cataclysm so much.
Oh, look how good I am! I'm so good at this fucking video game!
Anyway, Grasp of Lohk is in a similar vein. It allows you to make every Texas conservative's nightmare a reality by taking away an enemy's weapons and using them against them. Now, because DE tends to fight against AFK styles of play, the base firing range on these guns is incredibly small, being only 8 meters, and this has been a hotly debated topic since Xaku's release. For me personally, I kind of don't have a horse in that race. My guns tend to sit around 15 to 18 meters in terms of firing radius, and they take away the entire need to aim and shoot for yourself. And remember, this is a game with exceptional mobility options, so for me personally, I haven't had too many issues with its range. I'm still quite able to force a Grineer to reenact the ending of Red Dead Redemption with me. The guns also do pretty good damage against light and medium armored units, and since they deal void damage, they benefit from the void damage increase debuff that Xaku's 4 inflicts onto enemies. In other words, stripping in front of as many enemies as possible makes your guns hit harder. Now this power is also fun because it's essentially Radial Disarm's cooler cousin. It can disarm a large number of targets in a very respectable radius on top of giving you what is essentially a range limited aimbot. Though it does have a target limit, and it can't reach quite as far as what Radial Disarm can. Clasp of Lohk also in its current state has a mind of its own. A mind riddled with tumors and dementia. Like for example, it will constantly shoot any target affected by gaze. You know, the invincible target. The target with invincibility. The invincibility given specifically to gaze targets. That target. It will just shoot it over and over without end. Luckily, this is getting fixed. Thank fuck! Additionally, Past the Lohk has decided that it will not shoot anyone that's been affected by Accused, which is a CC effect that's part of Xaku's third ability. Why? Seriously, why? Accused isn't meant to cause enemies to do meaningful damage to each other, it's just for distracting them. Seriously, look at these two. It's fucking embarrassing. It's a CC, not meant for damage. So having the guns ignore them serves no purpose because these enemies aren't worth keeping around to hurt each other. So just fucking shoot them! And oddly, I didn't see anything about this being fixed in the workshop. So I guess we're being left in the dark until further notice on that issue. But overall, with the pull range buff it got, it's a much more consistent tool now, so well done, DE. Now just fix literally everything else. I don't ask for much. And because no new frame is complete without some sort of power cycle or hold/tap mechanic, here we have the Lost. Essentially 3 powers in 1, the Lost joins an ever-growing pool of cycle powers that refuse to adopt color-coded icons. And if I had to describe each of them all with one word each, it'd probably go like, meh. Accuse causes Xaku to point at enemies and accuse one of them of being an imposter. I'm voting blue. I saw him enter event. I hear people shit on Accuse from time to time, but seriously, think about it for a second. This shit is literally just a more consistent Nyx Chaos. Enemies will only attack each other, and plus it has a pretty huge range and also has the luxury of being aimable over what seems to be an infinite distance. So if you need a button to quickly stop shitters from attacking someone or something, throwing Accuse out isn't a bad idea. Hell, Hell, it even stops interception caps. So, bonus points there, boys. It does have some really stupid anti-synergetic properties with Gasp of Slop, but besides that, it's a pretty good CC. Though it does have one major weakness at the moment. It cannot be recast. Even if there's just one enemy left that's under its effects, you can't cast Accused again until you kill them or yeet yourself into a fucking pit. And this is kind of a huge issue that I find really baffling that DE didn't catch prior to their release. Like, how did an issue that Necros had years ago not get caught here? Luckily, the recast issue is getting fixed as well. And if they didn't fix it, I was gonna throw a shit fit. Gaze allows Xaku to turn an enemy into an armor-stripping field. And unfortunately, Gaze also happens to be, in my opinion, one of the more lackluster armor strips. And it also shares its name with the kit gun part. So from now on, I always have to make the fucking distinction as to which Gaze I'm talking about. This Gaze, or this Gaze. Anyway, the first issue I have with Gaze is its range. It's pretty fucking terrible, and it's especially noticeable on either large tiles or open worlds. It wouldn't be an issue if the ability wasn't designed to be a stationary field, but alas, it do be. Gaze pales in comparison to most other armor strip ranges in the game, from Vauban's Bastille, to Hildren's Pillage, to Ember's Fire Blast, and while they're not AoE strips, I'd argue even Seeking Shuriken and Psychic Bolts are better just because they have range and don't rely on enemies walking into a radius. Speaking of, Xaku has no inherent way of keeping enemies in the field. It's not like Bastille where enemies are held inside of it, meaning they're liable to just run out of it. Gaze is also limited in only having 2 fields out at a time. And if you fucking try to tell me, dude, just infuse larva onto them, I'm going to slap your cheeks into your fucking rectum. We are not going to start using Helmet as an excuse for this sort of shit. And while DE has said that they're going to be buffing its base radius by 4 meters, I'm still not convinced that's going to be enough to help it compete with other strips because of this next issue. Enemies are only stripped for as long as they're in the field. They don't even gradually get their armor back the instant they step out of it. They immediately revert to their base armor value. Compare that functionality to, well, literally every other strip in the game. Other armor strips either run off of a timer or are permanent, not fucking dependent on whether enemies are in a damn circle or not. And to top it all off, you need 200% power strength to get a max strip, which for certain frames isn't hard to achieve depending on how many stats are dump stats for them, but Xaku needs a decent amount of everything. Yes, they even still need a bit of duration, even with the buff to Vast Untime, because you need to keep their energy to duration ratios not terrible. And mind you, I was able to reach 200%, but it really fucks with build variety. It's especially annoying because most other strips in the game don't even need that much to do a full strip. And some frames, like Gauss and Ember, just use their own special type of meter to get their strip, so they barely have to build for theirs at all. Gaze is just way too situational of a strip. It has poor range, minimal cast instances, high strength requirements, and requires you to kindly ask enemies to not leave its area of effect. And lastly, we have Deny, and holy fucking shit, more like we've been denied a good power. Seriously, this thing is ass. It's a straight beam that does damage and lifts anything that survives it into the air, and that's about it. Deny fails to be useful as both a worthwhile damage tool and a CC. I mentioned on Twitter that it did have potential to be a tank buster power, like an extremely narrow tool mainly meant to one-tap larger targets for a heavy energy cost, and it seems like DE was trying to make it into that, at least judging by the first round of changes, but like always, they seem to have really underestimated how much they needed to buff it. Okay, so get this shit. The only way you can get this thing to do decent damage to, say, a level 100 heavy gunner is to get them into a gaze radius, which is already a fucking joke, but then you also need to hit them with Vast Untime's debuff. But wait, we're still not done. You then have to use Blast of Crocs to get some guns, because the hand laser scales with how many guns you have now. Now you can cast your laser. Well, whoopity fucking do. That means that you have to spend at Base efficiency, 300 energy, just to make this damn beam work once. It is that bad. It's also funny because Deny reminds me of Wukong's original one, a power that even some of DE's own staffs, such as Pablo, agreed was nearly useless because of its linear nature. And yet they seem to have forgotten that and just decided,
Yeah, sure, be more.
but, like I said, this could actually be worth it. But DE has to step out of their comfort zone and give this thing a fuck ton of damage. Like, a lot. Like, on a scale of baby with a boxing glove to Phil Swift, we need to round that meter over like 40 fucking times. If it's meant to be a tank buster power, this is what has to happen to make it so. But I won't hold my breath because DE is probably thinking values that high would rip a hole in the space-time continuum. Anyway, while I do think that Xaku's 1 is more expendable to Helmuth purely because of what Accuse can offer you in regards to stopping enemies in their tracks, I still wouldn't blame you for replacing the Lost either. The entire set is just kind of meh at best. The Vast Untime's sole purpose is to remove your fashion. Oh yeah, and it also slows enemies, makes them weaker to void damage, gives you 75% evasion, makes you move faster, and also got an entirely new effect that we'll be talking about shortly. But I digress. All of that is a bizarre mishmash of effects, and not what I would expect of an ability that turns you into a fucking skeleton. But then again, what exactly would a power that tears your own skin off do? Anyways, Vast Untime has a bit of an identity crisis. Basically just saying, here's 5 million effects that are a mix of buffs and debuffs, now fuck off. So just for a brief rundown of my thoughts on each of the buffs, the void damage increase debuff for enemies is quite spicy for Xaku's 2, and hopefully with the changes to void procs, it'll give you a little more reason to use their 1. The dodge chance boost I'm kind of meh on, since dodge prevents things like adaptations and any on-hit arcades from triggering, thus making it an anti-synergetic survival stat when compared with other forms of survivability. So I'm kind of indifferent on this buff and would honestly prefer it to be DR instead. The 20% movement speed increase, gotta be honest, I barely even notice it. And I honestly literally don't even care about it because we're already in a game in which we can outrun Zeus using nothing but our ass cheeks. So unless you give me a boost on the level of Volt or Gauss, I sleep. Also, the movement speed buff isn't affected by your power strength, so get fucked! And the slowdown effect, well, we'll get to more of this in a bit. So yeah, Vast Untime was in this really weird spot of giving you a whole lot of shit that you usually didn't care about. Kinda like your grandma at Christmas. That is, until someone in the community came up with a brilliant idea that truly shattered all other notions and concepts that we as human beings thought were revolutionary to our species. What if the name of the power made sense? So then DE made it so that while Vast Untime is active, it freezes all of your ability duration timers, which certainly helped this power come into its own. You know, instead of it feeling like a beef stew with all the meat picked out of it, essentially making it so that the only duration value that matters is Vast Untime's. As long as you keep recasting it, you pretty much never have to recast any of Xaku's other powers if you don't want to. This effect does wonders for Xaku's energy pool, especially with their really shitty modding potential. So for example, you no longer have to worry about their 2's piss-poor base duration. But unfortunately, the freeze doesn't apply to any abilities that you subsume onto Xaku.
Always a catch with this sort of thing.
So the slow effect of this power is interesting if you feel like meme building. See, if you're willing to stack nearly every power strength mod with growing power, empower, and maybe a Pax Bolt kit gun proc and or a Nida Spectre, it is possible to get the slow effect to be 100%.
In, other words...
Now, mind Mind you, this one's an absolutely fucking absurd amount of power strength on a frame that already wants a lot of everything else. Xaku isn't like fucking Hildren, who doesn't give a single iota of a fuck and can build for pure strength and suffer nearly zero consequences for it. No, 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 no. Trying to do this on Xaku really fucks them up in other areas. And because Xaku's 4 wants line of sight, you can't really use it the same way as something like Limbo Stasis. But it is there if you really want to be a Time Lord. In general though, my biggest problem with Vast Untime is that it deletes your fashion, dude! Seriously, there's no reason to not be in Vast Untime all of the time!
Reject flesh and muscle, return to skeleton.
So I don't know, I would like to see the visual changed in some way. See, as much as I despised when this power was both a channel and a duration, at least it gave a reason to not be constantly walking around with no fucking feet?
What are those?
And look, I don't think I have to say this, but I love being a skeleton. We all are skeletons. And like all of you, I extract mine once a week to polish it to a mirror shine. But not being able to see my fashion, it kind of hurts, Chief. Take it from someone who plays Loki. And I know this might seem like a meme complaint, but I'm not fucking around. Fashion is a huge deal. Please. Xaku, as a whole, like I said, functions, but they are in dire need of quite a lot of touch-ups. But like we mentioned before, those touch-ups are coming, and they seem to address most of what is getting my panties in a twist. Though I still suspect that Deny and Gaze will be kind of mediocre. Without a proper look at Deny's damage, it's just gonna be Wukong's original 1 all over again, and Gaze losing its effect once enemies leave the circle makes it a pretty damn subpar strip in comparison to things like Fire Blast or Pillage, for example. I would also obviously love to see Vast Untime's dodge chance effect change to damage reduction, and, you know, for it to not make me look like a fucking anorexic iron giant at all times, but in the end, Xaku's kit is one of my favorites in terms of design, and as long as DE doesn't pull a 180 and take away any of the upcoming changes, I think they'll be in a good place. You know who's not in a good place though? This guy! Because now, I'm off to do more of my stug run. I would rather drink a jar of spoiled mayonnaise. Goodbye.